No one ever truly disappears, not even civilizations. They leave echoes for those who can still hear. We like to imagine the past as gone, as dust and ruin, as something sealed behind glass in museums or buried under the weight of time. But the truth is stranger. The past never left. It lingers beneath our cities, beneath our rituals, beneath the very patterns of thought we mistake for our own. You've walked among their traces. You've seen them without knowing. A weathered stone in the foundation of a modern wall. A strange alignment of streets that makes no sense until you trace it against the stars. A pattern etched in architecture that whispers geometry older than language. These are not accidents. They are shadows of forgotten architects. Those who walked before us did not vanish. They retreated, leaving behind keys buried in plain sight. Our history books say, they lived, they built, they died. Linear, final. But history is not a straight line. It is a spiral, a pattern folding in on itself, again and again. And the ones who walked before us, they knew this. They knew time is not a river but a tide, and the tide always returns. That is why they carved in stone. That is why they aligned their monuments to stars that rise only once in millennia, not for glory, not for worship, but for transmission. Imagine this, a civilization so advanced, its knowledge could not survive on fragile scrolls or fleeting tongues. They understood impermanence, the great eraser, so they left messages not in words, but in form, in symbols, in alignments, in architecture that defies explanation. Not myths, not superstition, maps, memory anchors. And yet, we call them primitive. We measure their ruins with tape and laser, catalog their carvings, display their bones under sterile light. We congratulate ourselves on being modern, forgetting that our steel towers will turn to dust long before their stones crumble. Why do you think their works still stand? Why do you think their echoes still vibrate through us? Because they were never just building cities. They were encoding continuity. For us, for now, for the moment when the spiral tightens and the questions begin to surface again. Some call them Atlanteans. Others call them the first builders, the children of the dawn, the keepers of Zep Tepi. Names don't matter. What matters is that they walked this earth with an understanding we can barely imagine. And they left more than bones behind. They left instructions, not in speech, not in text, but in traces. Traces buried under oceans, under deserts, under every major city you think you know. And here is the secret that history will never tell you. You were never meant to find them by accident. They are not for the blind. They are not for the curious. They are for the awake. Because these traces, these silent witnesses of an age before time, will not speak to everyone. They will speak to those who can hear the language of pattern, of geometry, of myth. And if you're here, if you're listening to this, you already feel it. The question pulling at the edge of your mind: why do these ruins feel alive? Why do these myths feel true? Why do I feel like I've seen this before? That feeling is not nostalgia. It is recognition. Because the ones who walked before us are not entirely gone. Their bodies turned to dust. Their names dissolved in silence. But their memory still moves beneath your feet. Through stone, through symbols, through stories that refuse to die. And if you listen long enough, you will hear the hum beneath the noise, the echo of architects who built not just for their time, but for all time. For us, for now, because the cycle always returns. And when it does, someone must remember where the traces lead. We live in a world of letters, of alphabets, of words strung like beads to build meaning. But words are fragile. They shatter across centuries. They fracture into dialects, into mistranslations, into silence. And so what survives when language is erased? The language beneath language. The ones who walked before us knew this. They understood that time is a corrosive river, one that erases not just bodies, but stories. So they spoke in a tongue that time could not dissolve. A language older than ink, older than speech, the language of pattern, of geometry, of symbol. Circles, spirals, triangles carved into stone and echoed in the layout of cities, a serpent swallowing its tail, a ladder of 7 steps carved into a cave wall. These are not ornaments. They are syllables in a forgotten alphabet. Why do the same symbols appear in places divided by oceans? Why does the spiral dance across the pottery of Africa, the glyphs of Mesoamerica, the stones of Neolithic Europe? Coincidence or continuity? The scholars call it archetype, as if giving it a name solves the mystery. But the truth is deeper. These shapes are not mere art. They are memory structures, carved to awaken something in you. Not your intellect, but the part of you that remembers what the mind has forgotten. Symbols are bridges. Each one is a frequency frozen into form. When you look at it, it begins to hum in the silent chamber of your being. You don't read it, you recognize it. That's why certain shapes feel familiar, even when you've never seen them before. Why a glyph from Sumer can stir the same unease as a sigil from the Andes. It's because these fragments belong to a code that runs deeper than culture, deeper than history, deeper than flesh. But here's the secret. The language beneath language was not invented for art. It was a delivery system. What they left behind was not information, it was activation. They knew the cycle would close. They knew forgetting was inevitable. So they buried not stories, but seeds. Seeds hidden in the spiral of a petroglyph, in the alignment of pillars to solstice light, in the proportions of a temple that mirrors the body and the cosmos at once. Because a symbol doesn't just speak to your mind, it reconfigures your perception. It is a key that fits into the lock of your nervous system and turns without a sound. And the question you should ask is this: why did they want to wake us? What was so urgent that they carved maps into stone that could outlast ice, fire, and flood? What storm did they see on the horizon that we have yet to name? Because if you think the spiral is decoration, if you think the serpent is a myth, if you think the triangle is random, you are already blind. These are not relics. They are instructions. Not for everyone. For those who can still feel the hum. For those who look long enough to notice the pattern behind the pattern. Look closer. Why do cathedrals echo with the same geometry as pyramids? Why do the floor plans of temples mirror constellations frozen in stone? Why does the Fibonacci spiral bloom in both the Nautilus shell and the steps of ancient sanctuaries? Because the builders were not just architects, they were cartographers of the unseen. Mapping a landscape you cannot walk, but can only enter through the eye that opens inward. So the next time you see a symbol, a circle, a key, a ladder, a serpent coiled around a rod, don't look with the eye of logic. Look with the eye that dreams. Feel the echo it leaves in you. Because these signs are not fragments of a dead tongue. They are still alive, still transmitting, waiting for the one who remembers how to listen. And if you've felt that shiver, that tremor of recognition that makes no sense, then you already know. The language beneath language is speaking, not to your mind, to your marrow. The only question is, will you answer? When civilizations vanish, what survives? Not flesh, not fabric, not the fragile whispers of language. Clay crumbles, papyrus rots, books turn to dust in the first breath of fire. But the stones remain. The ones who walked before us understood this. They were not naive builders stacking rocks for shelter. They were engineers of time. They knew the floods would come. They knew the fires would sweep across continents. They knew that empires rise like waves, only to collapse into foam and disappear. So they built not for decades, not for dynasties, but for cycles, for epochs, for the moments when the spiral would turn and the world would wake again. And their message? They carved it into stone. Not because stone is eternal, nothing is, but because stone outlives memory. It outlives story. It outlives denial. A stone temple does not care who claims the throne. A monolith does not kneel before kings or conquerors. Stone is the only voice that can still speak after 10,000 years of silence. Look around. Our skyscrapers glitter, but they are ghosts of glass. Our monuments of steel and concrete will fall to dust long before the Great Pyramids crumble. The ancients didn't build the tallest towers. They built the most enduring ones. Why? Because they were not trying to touch the sky. They were trying to touch the future. That's why they chose granite, basalt, diorite stones harder than thought. Stones that fight the chisel, that resist the blade, that bleed sparks when struck by iron. They weren't making art. They were making archives. Archives no flood could erase. Archives no empire could rewrite. Every groove, every angle, every alignment was a sentence in a language of permanence. But here's the paradox. We stand among these archives and call them mysteries. We marvel at their size, their symmetry, their strange defiance of erosion, and we ask the wrong question. How did they build this? The real question is, why did they build this? Why haul stones heavier than locomotives across deserts and rivers when mud and timber were easier? Why carve blocks so perfect they lock without mortar, their joints tighter than any modern engineer can replicate? Why, unless they knew with certainty that everything else would fall and only stone would remain? And what do these stones say? Nothing. Not to the eye that looks without listening, but to the one who sees, who notices the impossible alignments, the sacred ratios, the echoes of constellations frozen in geometry. The stones begin to speak. They say, "We were here. We knew. We warned. And when the world forgot, we remembered for you." Walk among the megaliths, and you will feel it, that hum in your bones, that quiet gravity that makes no sense. It is not superstition. It is recognition. Because the stones were not placed for gods. They were placed for you. For the one who would return, millennia later, with a hunger for meaning so sharp it could cut through the fog of forgetting. For the one who would stop scrolling long enough to ask, what is this doing here? Why does it feel alive? And here's the truth the world is not ready to hear. Some of these stones are older than history admits, older than the civilizations we credit as their builders, older than the myths that try to explain them away. Because the ones who set them did not belong to history as we know it. They belong to something deeper, something we've lost the map to. But they left us fragments, anchors, pillars in the tide of time, not to worship, not to fear, but to remember. So the next time you see a monument rising from the dust, a circle of stones staring skyward, a wall whose weight defies reason, don't ask what God they prayed to. Ask what truth they were trying to save. Because stone is not mute, it speaks. And the message is simple. What you think is permanent is a lie, but what we left for you is still here. Find it before the tide returns. Every ancient culture tells us the same thing. that the sky was not just a ceiling, but a map, that the stars were not distant fires, but coordinates, messages, markers of something deeper. And if you think the ancients gazed upward for poetry, you've misunderstood the scale of their vision. They were not dreamers, they were cartographers of the infinite. Look at their works. The pyramids of Giza, aligned with Orion's belt, Teotihuacan, its avenues pointing to the Pleiades. Stonehenge, calibrated to solstice light like a cosmic clock. Even the forgotten ziggurats, the great towers of Sumer and Babylon, each one oriented not by convenience, but by the pulse of the heavens. Why? Why would those who fought against famine and flood spend lifetimes moving mountains of stone just to point them at stars? Because they knew something we don't, or something we've chosen to forget. The earth is not isolated. It hums in resonance with the cosmos. The ancients understood that life, all life, is woven into a greater pattern, a tapestry stretched between earth and sky. The stars were not decorations. They were nodes in a living network, markers of cycles so vast that a single human lifespan barely scratches their arc. The builders were not obsessed with eternity. They were obsessed with timing. Imagine this, a civilization so advanced that it can read the heartbeat of the galaxy, not with machines but with mind, with intuition sharpened by millennia of observation. They knew the rise and fall of ages. They knew that what begins must return, that light itself moves in spirals, and those spirals dictate the fate of worlds. So they left monuments as synchronizers, as reminders of the great clock ticking in the sky above us. Because one day the cycle would close, and only those who could read the heavens would understand what was coming. Why do you think the myths repeat? Golden ages followed by floods, gods descending in fire, civilizations swallowed by the sea. These are not fairy tales. They are records, encoded in story, echoed in stone, mapped onto constellations that hold their positions like frozen words in a cosmic sentence. But we forgot how to read them. We turned the sky into a backdrop, a pretty dome for poets, a canvas for dreams. We stopped seeing the warning. We stopped hearing the hum. But the monuments remain. Their alignments do not lie. Their geometry still whispers to anyone who cares to measure the shadow at equinox or trace the line of sunrise through an ancient corridor. And when you do, the message emerges. The earth is not alone. It never was. And the forces that shape the past are still moving toward us. So look again at the night sky. Feel the weight of those stars. Ask yourself, why did they map these constellations with such precision? Why did they carve them into temples and weave them into myths? Because they knew. They knew that one day someone would look up and feel the same shiver. Not wonder, recognition. The echoes are still there, not in words, not in books, but in the silent dialogue between stone and star. A dialogue waiting for ears that can listen, eyes that can see, and a mind willing to ask, what were they trying to tell us? And why does it feel like the time to know is now? Every culture tells the same tales. A flood that drowned the world, a serpent coiled around the roots of existence, a golden age lost, a tower that reached for heaven and shattered, fire stolen from the gods, a hero who descends into the underworld and returns, changed. From Sumer to Greece, from the Vedas to the Norse sagas, from the glyphs of the Maya to the chants of the Polynesians. Why do these echoes ripple across oceans, across millennia, across civilizations that never touched? Coincidence or continuity? The scholars call it archetype, A neat word to box the infinite. But what if these stories are not inventions of imagination? What if they are fractals of memory? Fragments of a message too vast for a single age to carry. Broken pieces of an original pattern that once spanned the whole earth. And like shattered glass, each culture picked up a shard, sharp, gleaming, reflecting a part of the whole. The flood myth. It's everywhere. Not just in the Bible, but in Gilgamesh, in the Popol Vuh, in the whispers of the Hopi, in the dreams of the Dogon. What is it telling us? Not a moral tale, not divine punishment, but a memory of reset, a memory of a world that ended and of the few who crossed the threshold into the next. The serpent. Why does it slither through every story? The Ouroboros in Egypt, Jormungandr in Norse myth, the feathered Quetzalcoatl, the Naga of India. Serpent as chaos, serpent as wisdom, serpent as cycle. It is not about the animal, it is about movement, about the spiral of time, the loop that devours itself only to begin again. The hero's descent, Osiris torn and reassembled, Inanna plunging into shadow, Orpheus seeking the lost, even Christ descending before the dawn. Why does this pattern repeat? Because it is the map of initiation, the truth that life demands a death before rebirth, not of the body, but of the self you think you are. These are not random fables. They are codes embedded in narrative, carried across epochs like seeds in the wind, because those who walked before us knew we would forget the science, the language, the mechanisms of the cosmos. But story survives. It hides truth in plain sight. It wears the mask of fiction so that power will not destroy it, so that time will not erase it. And here is the paradox. You don't need to believe the myths. You need to decode them. The ark is not a boat. It is a vessel of knowledge, sealed for the next cycle. The serpent is not evil. It is the pulse of eternity, curling back upon itself. The underworld is not hell. It is the chamber of transformation, the silence between two heartbeats, where a new world gestates. Look again at these stories. Strip away the names, the costumes, the masks. What remains? The same skeleton, the same sequence, birth, collapse, flood, renewal, as above so below, as within so without. The myths are not warnings of what might happen. They are records of what always happens. The cycle turns. The tower rises. The waters come. The hero descends. And the world begins again. So when you hear these myths, don't smile and call them primitive. Feel the shiver in your spine, because deep down, you already know. They are not telling stories. They are telling you what is coming. There are lines on this planet that no one taught you to see. They are not printed in atlases. They do not glow on digital screens. And yet they are there, stretching across deserts, slicing through oceans, linking mountains and monuments like beads on an invisible thread. The ancients knew them. They built upon them. They whispered of them in codes so old that we mistake them for myth. They called them dragon paths, ley lines, the veins of the earth. We call them coincidence. But deep down, you already know. There are no coincidences of this magnitude. Stand on the Giza Plateau, trace a line to Teotihuacan, then to Easter Island, then to Angkor Wat. What do you see? Not chaos, not random distribution, a pattern, a geometry so vast it stretches across the sphere of the world. Why? Why did cultures with no contact place their most sacred sites on the same hidden grid? Because the earth is not inert. It hums, it pulses, It breathes through energy lines that ripple like invisible rivers beneath the soil. The ones who walked before us were not just builders. They were cartographers of the unseen. Look closer, Nazca. Vast figures carved into the desert, only visible from the sky. Who were those drawings for? Not the humans on the ground. Look at the petroglyphs etched into canyon walls, marking equinoxes and solstices with unerring precision. Who needed such calendars? Not farmers alone, but navigators of time itself. And then the maps, the ones history cannot explain. The Piri Reis map, drawn in 1513, charting Antarctica without ice. How could a sailor of the Renaissance know the shape of a continent buried under miles of frozen silence? Unless he was copying a copy of a copy, an echo of a map older than history. Why do these things matter? Because they point to something deliberate, a system of knowledge hidden in alignments, in architecture, in the very placement of cities. Your world is not random. It is coded. It is gridded like a circuit board designed to carry power, a living diagram of forces we no longer name. And who designed it? Not kings, not priests, but those who understood the earth as an engine of energy, a receiver, a transmitter. You've heard whispers of it. The Great Pyramid aligned to true north within a fraction of a degree. Stonehenge tuned to solstice sunrise. Angkor Wat reflecting the pattern of Draco as it appeared 12,000 years ago. Why? Because these were not temples for worship. They were instruments, tools for synchronizing the human mind with the rhythm of the cosmos. They weren't kneeling to the stars, they were tuning the planet like a harp to the frequencies of the heavens. But that knowledge is gone, or so we think. In truth, it is buried, hidden under new cities, drowned under oceans, encoded in myths we treat as fantasy. And yet the traces remain, waiting for those who remember how to look. Because the ones who drew these maps did not do so for vanity. They did it for survival, for continuity, for the day when the cycle would close and the map would be needed again. And here we are, walking blind across a living diagram, building glass towers on forgotten intersections of force, thinking we are modern while standing on the ruins of a knowledge so vast it makes our science look like a child's sketch. But some still see it, the alignments, the echoes, the hum beneath the ground. And they know the map is not finished because the map is alive and it is waking. We like to think the ancients wanted worship, that their monuments were built for gods, their temples for glory, their rituals for power. But what if that was never the purpose? What if the truth is far more unsettling and far more urgent? What if they left all of this for you? Think about it. Why build structures that would outlast empires, outlast languages, outlast the very people who built them? Why carve secrets into stones that would stand in silence for 10,000 years? Not for vanity, not for ritual alone, but because they knew something we have forgotten. Memory is fragile, and when memory breaks, the cycle repeats. This is the real story. They were not warning you about the past. They were warning you about the future. About a time when humanity would drift so far from the rhythms of the earth and the stars that it would forget its own blueprint. A time when machines would replace myths, when cities would glow like suns while the real sun went unnoticed. A time like now. So they left markers. Not obvious, not easy, because what is easy is quickly corrupted. They hid their messages in architecture, in geometry, in myths so layered they would sound like dreams, until the moment someone began to see the pattern. What do the patterns say? Look closely. The same numbers spiral through their temples, ratios that mirror the orbit of Venus, the precession of equinoxes, the heartbeat of cosmic cycles. Why encode astronomy into stone? Because the sky is the only book no tyrant can burn. Because when the towers fall and the archives turn to ash, the stars remain, and the monuments that mirror them still whisper the truth. The myths, too, were not stories. They were keys. The flood, a memory of reset. The serpent, a code for cycles. The hero's descent, a map for transformation. Each story a fragment. Each fragment a signal waiting for those who can decode the hidden syntax of the ancient mind. And why now? Why are we starting to notice the alignments, the recurring symbols, the impossible knowledge carved into ruins older than history? Because the cycle is closing. Because the tides they warned of are already rising, not water, but something deeper. Something that erases worlds and writes new ones in their place. They didn't leave these traces to glorify the past. They left them to prepare the future. So, the question is not, what did they want us to know? The question is, what did they want us to do? And maybe the answer is not in words at all. Maybe it's in the silence of standing stones, in the hum beneath your feet when you walk on ancient ground, in the shiver you feel when you see a symbol, and it feels familiar. That is not imagination. That is memory awakening. Because you are not separate from them. You are the continuation of their work, and the map they left was never for them. It was for you. Walk through an ancient city and listen, not to the tourists, not to the guides reciting dates like dead numbers, but to the spaces between. Feel the weight in the stones, the way the air hums in a corridor aligned to the sun, the strange pull in your chest when your shadow crosses a carving that has stared into millennia of dawns. That is not imagination. That is signal. The ones who walked before us are gone, but not gone. Their blood dissolved into dust, their names erased from the ledgers of kings, and yet something moves beneath your feet. It moves in the lattice of cities built on forgotten foundations. It moves in the spiral that hides in every sacred diagram. It moves in your dreams, the ones that leave you waking with a taste of stars on your tongue. You think it's nothing, coincidence, but the whispers are growing louder. Why now? Because the spiral is closing. The same spiral they knew would return. The same tide that drowned their world, that reset the page of history, is rising again. Not water this time, something subtler, a shift in the field, a rearrangement of the real. And the traces? They are not warnings of doom. They are instructions for passage, keys left for those who would awaken in time. Look at the signs. Why does the old knowledge feel alive again? Why do symbols hidden in plain sight begin to vibrate with meaning when you see them without distraction? Why does your body react heart quickening, skin tingling to places where the ground is older than memory? Because the signal is calling, not to everyone, to those who can still feel the hum, to those who are ready to remember. You were not taught this language. You were born with it, buried under noise, under doctrine, under the thin skin of a world that told you matter was all there is. But when you stand before a monolith at sunset and something in you bows without command, that is the trace speaking. That is the bridge between now and before opening in your marrow. And what do the whispers say? Not in words. Words are too small for this. But if you could translate the hum into language, it might say something like this. You are not lost. You are not the first. You are the continuation. And the path is still here if you have the courage to follow it. So the question is not, will the traces survive? They have survived every fire, every flood, every empire. They will outlast this one too. The question is, will you hear them? Will you walk blind through the ruins and call them dead stones? Or will you stop and listen and let the whisper unfold into a memory that was waiting for you all along? Because the traces are not relics. They are messages. Messages from those who refuse to let the story end. Messages meant for this exact moment in the spiral. And if you're listening now, you were meant to hear it. The traces are still whispering. They always have. The only question is, what will you do now that you know they are speaking to you?